Good morning, everybody. We'll let participants filter in. And at this time, I will ask our participants, our panelists, to turn their cameras off for just a quick moment. All right. Let's see. There we go. We will let see if any other attendees join us. In the meantime, I will introduce myself. I am Kimberly Meck, the Executive Director of Disability Empowerment Center. I am a white female wearing a Kraken hoodie, go Kraken, with my long hair pulled up behind me and probably bags under my eyes because I have a son who is home with the flu. So trying to get him healthy. Um, I'm going to read some accessibility statements and then let Sarah take the reins. So, captions are available in Zoom. Click Show Subtitle in your Zoom menu bar to turn them on. Captions are also running at captionviewer.net. That URL is too long to read, but we'll paste it into the chat for you. ASL interpreters are available today, and we're presenting in gallery view, so the interpreters should always be visible. You do not need to pin them. Please know that we have two interpreters, so if you pin the current interpreter, it could prevent you from seeing the active interpreter after an interpreter change. You do not need to be on Zoom to access this event. We will read all questions out loud and voice any images on the screen so that content will be available to individuals calling in on the phone or who cannot see visual content. This event is being recorded, and we will answer questions throughout the discussion, periodically throughout the discussion. Please use the Q&A tab for any questions you have for the panelists, and please use the chat tab for general conversation or comments. Please also note that we'll use both person with a disability and disabled person interchangeably, recognizing different people's preference for person first or identity first language. And with that, I will hand it over to Sarah.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Understanding Ableism webinar series, which is hosted by the King County Disability Consortium and the Disability Empowerment Center. My name is Sarah Marshall. My pronouns are she, her, and I am an AmeriCorps member serving at the Disability Empowerment Center as the KCDC coordinator. I am a white woman with short brown hair. I'm wearing a pair of gray headphones. I'm wearing a lilac top with a little cardigan over top, and I am sitting in an office. So to start our panel today, I want to give a definition from disability researcher Ian Langtree, who defines ableism as a complex system of beliefs, practices, and institutional structures that position disability as inherently negative while simultaneously privileging non-disabled bodies and minds as the standard against which all others are measured. And so with this definition in mind, the Understanding Ableism series was created to explore how ableism shows up in our policies, communities, and everyday interactions. Each session brings together community members and advocates to share lived experiences and practical knowledge with the hope of helping us all move towards a more inclusive and accessible King County. Just to give you a little background, the King County Disability Consortium began during the COVID-19 pandemic as a way to connect disability-serving organizations and community members during a time of widespread isolation and uncertainty. As many of us know, people with disabilities face disproportionate barriers from healthcare access to transportation, digital communication, and basic safety, just to name a few. KCDC was built to share information and elevate lived experiences to respond to the needs of our disability community. And so for the January session of the 2025 Understanding Ableism series, we will be focusing on the experience of traveling with a disability. This session will explore what it means to move through the world where access is never guaranteed, whether that's someone is navigating a new environment, taking a trip, or simply trying to get to one place, from one place to another. Travel often requires Travel often requires layers of planning and flexibility for people with disabilities and includes the uncertainty of what will or won't be accessible, which can shape every stage of the journey. Our panelists are going to share some stories of how travel can influence independence, support connection with others, and participation in everyday life. It can create moments of risk and frustration while simultaneously sparking creativity in how people navigate unexpected barriers. We hope to consider how reimagining travel through a disability lens can expand inclusion and reshape how we think about movement, exploration, and belonging. And so, Kimberly, if you're able, could you upload a PDF of the question to the chat?
Will do.
Great. And so now we'll move on to our lovely panelists. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves with their names and pronouns, a short visual description, and what their connection is to this topic. And we will go in order of who is listed on the PowerPoint, which will be Kenny, Dorian, and then Laura.
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, my name's Kenny Salvini. My pronouns are he, him. I am a white, mid-40s male wearing a blue beanie with a salt and pepper beard and a bluish brown flannel. I am the co-founder and executive director of the Here Now Project, which is a support network for people with spinal cord injuries and other mobility disabilities. And my connection to the travel space is, yeah, just having traveled quite a bit as a C3-4 complete quadriplegic with a power wheelchair. And yeah, I've had a few disastrous experiences. And yeah, and I also write part-time for New Mobility magazine on self-advocacy, travel, and all sorts of topics. Just really grateful to be here and grateful to be a part of the panel.
All right. Excuse me. My name's Dorian Esper-Taylor or Dorian Taylor. My pronouns are he, him, or they, them. I am a young presenting middle-aged Black person with short faded hair. And I'm a light-skinned Black person, and I have a green collared shirt on. And I'm here. My connection to here is multiple. A, I have disabilities. I'm also a paraplegic, a T8 incomplete paraplegic. I use a manual wheelchair. I've had a lot of experience traveling. Um, um, I've also had some disastrous experiences, and I also work for public transportation as an ADA coordinator.
Hello, everybody. This is Laura Lowe speaking. I use she, they pronouns. I just shaved my head, so I've got some salt and pepper, super short hair right now, and a polka dotted shirt. I am adoptee from Colombia, and I'm a white presenting Hispanic person. I am in my role at Hopelink, I work on the mobility team. We're the designated mobility managers for King County. There's 15 of us on our team, and I work on a technology project called Find a Ride, which is for King Pierce and Snohomish County, and it's co-designed with community. And the purpose of it is to help people, older adults and people with disabilities, find and secure transportation. And we are both a state and federally funded project. I am also someone who has experienced temporary disabilities that impacted my mobility And then I have some longer term chronic illness as well as anxiety that does impact my own experiences of travel, everyday travel as well as, more extensive travel. So I'm here both representing Hopelink Mobility and also telling my own stories as well. And I really appreciate being on this panel.
Thank you so much for your introductions. We're going to transition to our first question, which is, when you think about traveling with a disability, what is the first thing that comes to mind and why? And so Kenny, we'll start with you.
Yeah, this is Kenny. Preparation is the first thing that comes to mind, I would say. Like the other panelists, I've had some pretty bad experiences when it comes to travel, but I've also had some really good experiences as well. And as the kind of my main example, the first flight I ever took post injury, I flew to New York City for a 2-week vacation on the East Coast and wound up having my chair destroyed by one of the airlines. I spent about 11 of the 14 days on the East Coast without my chair at all. Yeah, it was pretty traumatizing, but it also showed me that, I'm a little bit more resilient than I'd ever really imagined. But you have that experience and you learn to kind of re-engineer your travel plans accordingly. And yeah, there's a lot of fairly significant hurdles that get in the way. I'm in the middle of planning a family trip to kind of the LA area for the Abilities Expo in a couple months, and it's expensive, and it has a lot of pre-planning that goes into it. But I also know that it's doable when I am prepared and I understand my system as well as I do. So yeah, I'll pass for now on to that.
Thanks, Kenny. This is Dorian. Um, I also have to say that preparation comes to mind, and examination. So I have to say that depending on the mode of travel, I've had my wheelchair damaged before as well. Um, on airlines, and I have learned that it's important to examine my wheelchair before and after the flight, immediately. I made the mistake of not examining my chair when I got back from my first international flight that I took using a wheelchair, and woke up after jet lag to find some severe damage to my chair, and then it was a little bit of a hassle. But preparation can really make a beautiful trip. And that is even if I'm just traveling. I drive, and I like to go on road trips, even if they're just short road trips. And I have made the mistake of forgetting really important things uh, more than once. I've forgotten catheters on long distance trips and had to have them mailed to me, because I wasn't going to have enough to complete the trip, and on the road trips I've had to come back home because I didn't bring enough medical supplies, and so that can really make or break, whether or not I enjoy myself. But if I prepare as much in advance for possible, then I'm like the likeliness of me having a good trip, just is exponentially higher.
This is Laura speaking, and I asked the folks on the mobility team at Hopelink, what they felt was the biggest barriers. Um, and we came up with sidewalks, lack of consistent sidewalks, or predictability with the sidewalks, as well as lack of benches for people to rest if they had trouble walking long distances, to be able to kind of along their route be able to pause and kind of get their energy back. Um, and so, that might be reflecting a lot of the work we do is with older adults. And those are some things. But yeah, and then me personally, I find that our cities are designed for cars. And I've done a lot of work over the years with land use advocacy and trying to make our cities more prioritized for people that are getting around not in cars. And yeah, so those kinds of larger land use changes that need to happen to address kind of the day-to-day barriers or the inconveniences that can arise when our cities have not been designed for people with disabilities.
This is Sarah. Thank you all for sharing. I find it interesting that in this sort of preparation and also kind of a knowing of your environment reflects a need to adapt to different transit and travel systems, especially since there's not one complete agency or authority responsible for them. I think that maybe speaks to a lot of different things that we'll get into a little bit later in this webinar. But with that, let's move into our next question, which is, what kinds of planning or preparation do you find necessary before a trip? And are there specific tools, resources, or types of information that make planning more accessible for you?
Yeah. Hey, all, it's Kenny again. I'm just thinking through this LA trip that I'm getting ready for. It's definitely a reverse engineering kind of thing. It's very expensive when you're traveling, especially with a power wheelchair. I have to find an accessible rental van. Find accessible-ish hotels and other places to stay as well. But yeah, it really just starts with, okay, where am I going? Do they have vans? Do they, and then it goes, where am I staying? And then finally, how am I getting there? Um, yeah, and so a few of the resources and tools that I use, specifically for air travel, I use TSA Cares, which seems to be like one of the best kept secrets in air travel. That it's a hotline you can call about 72 hours prior to your trip, and they will kind of give you white glove services from check-in all the way through TSA and get you to your gate much more smoothly, depending on their availability, obviously. And it's a national resource that people are able to use. And but yeah, but then I think of the tools that I need. I've learned to become an expert in my own wheelchair and learning to modify my chair accordingly, especially when it comes to um, most airplanes are not built for power wheelchairs, and so I've got to break my wheelchair down enough so that it can get into the cargo hold, which is the rough threshold of a 737 is about 33 inches. So I've had to do significant modifications to my chair, whether it's taking a hacksaw to some pieces or removing bolts right when we get to the jetway or the gate. And yeah, so I bring my own little toolkit that my my poor wife has to often dismantle my wheelchair. But yeah, it's like I said, it's a step by step and reverse engineering logistical nightmare, but I've learned to create a system around it, and it's made it much easier for me to kind of navigate. So I can stop there.
Yeah, this is Dorian. So I've actually got a trip coming up next month. I'm going to Japan, and there um it's a lot of I like to make lists before the trips of the things that I think that I'll need or the things that I think that I might need. I also carry tools because I use a manual wheelchair. It's a lot of just like regular uh, Allen wrenches and socket, socket tools. I just have a set that I travel with. I also try to carry like a small portable electric pump for my tires and a tire patching tool. Um, I take pictures, like I said before and after, of my chair. I do as best to research where I'm going beforehand to see what access is like, what catching public transportation is like, if that's going to be possible for me at all, what a hotel is like. Right now, I'm my partner and I don't live in the same country, so we plan to meet around the same time. But we made a mistake of meeting. We are landing at the same time, just two different airports. So we are navigating the logistics of what travel would look like, or what waiting at the airport would look like for my partner to meet me there. So just really try to be as prepared as possible, but also, as mentioned before, knowing that accessibility looks different everywhere, every country that you travel to, and so things might not have the same level of access that you're used to, and so just kind of playing that as it as it is. For example, in Japan, you you have to be there to get an accessible hotel. It's hard to book one. You can say that you need one, but you can't necessarily pre-book an accessible hotel. So it's kind of like um, making sure that you know the norms and what accessibility is like for each country when you travel there, and so that you know that you're gonna have an accessible hotel or um, and also just knowing that it's a little bit of trial and error, and I've experienced some of that by myself, and it can be a little difficult to navigate, but that's why it's just important to prepare as much as you can.
Hi, this is Laura Lowe speaking. I work on the Find a Ride project at Hopelink. And I guess this is a moment for me to talk about Find a Ride. It's a three-county trip planner, and there's about 50 services that are listed in the trip planner, and then 100 services listed at findaride.org. And for folks that are traveling to the Seattle area, if you have friends coming, from out of town and they have access needs to get around, it's a good place to start because it gives you like a match. It's like a matchmaking of, instead of looking at a list of 50 services, you kind of put in what you need, whether you need door to door, or you need curb to curb, or you need support from a driver, or what types of mobility devices. You need a lift for the vehicle, and it matches you to what's available. And even when you're traveling, there's like reciprocal agreements. So if you qualify for ADA accessibility in one part of the country, with some pre-planning, again, the extra time and energy and effort that people with disabilities have to do when they travel is, again, emphasized here. But also there's these reciprocal relationships. So we're expecting, with the upcoming World Cup and 30,000 people a day coming for over 6 weeks to our city, a lot of those folks will hopefully be using things like findaride.org to in advance to get up to speed on how they might be able to move around. For example, using King County Metro Community Van. So if you have 2 or more people, you can get a volunteer that will drive you around. The vans are fully accessible, and they're located kind of outside of the urban area, but you can go up to 2 hours away. So that would be a service that maybe someone would discover by using Find a Ride that they wouldn't discover using Google Maps or any other It's not listed on any other trip planners. So that's kind of a pitch for my work project. But me personally, one of the tools that I find to be amazing is called C-Spot Saver, and it's free and it's from the Port of Seattle. And about 4 or 5 days before your flight, you can sign up and you don't have to be TSA pre-check. And it allows you to have a half an hour window to get through security. And through, again, emphasizing that trial and error piece, what I've learned is if I choose, usually fly Alaska, but if I choose checkpoint 2, I get dropped off by a friend or, at checkpoint at the Delta terminal, and I can get straight to the 2 and I walk right through and I don't have any line. It's the same line that like the pilots use. So that's just kind of a cool tool that the Port of Seattle offers for folks. So, it works for families or individuals. What I've learned that a lot of people in my community think, oh, there's someone else that could be using the services, and they self-select to not use it. And so I just want to give people here that might have a temporary disability or maybe an invisible disability, give yourself permission to use these services and give yourself permission to make your life easier because travel is hard enough.
Well said, Laura. This is Sarah speaking. I really liked the point you made earlier about the amount of effort and time that people with disabilities have to put into their travel plans. And I think that's maybe where ableism becomes more visible in that, because there's definitely a lot of labor. I think that's the right term for it, labor put into making sure that your needs are met. And so for our next question, what are some of the biggest accessibility challenges you've encountered outside of transportation? And so this can be kind of however our panelists choose to interpret it, whether it's, lodging, navigating an unfamiliar environment, maybe a country like Dorian mentioned, even dealing with customer service. It's kind of however you guys want to interpret it.
Hey guys, it's Kenny. I've got a perfect example when it comes to lodging. You hear a lot about the inaccessibility of hotels, and there's a pretty wide spectrum of needs. Like Dorian and I need completely different setups for accessibility, whereas Dorian's going to be doing popover transfers. I need to use maybe a Hoyer lift of some sort. And these days, most hotel beds have been placed on pedestals that do not allow for Hoyer lifts to get their wheels under. We took a trip to Wenatchee last summer for an outreach event, and we were pleasantly surprised at a certain hotel that their bed in their ADA rooms was not on a pedestal, but it had wheels. And we were borrowing a Hoyer lift from one of our friends that was in town, and I went to the front desk, and the wheels looked like they were going to be a little bit too short because the Hoyer lift wheels seemed pretty tall. So I said, "Hey, can you guys lift the bed up just a little bit higher, whether it's with some bricks or blocks or something? We just need about 3 or 4 inches to make the bed higher." And yeah, the person at the front desk it was a weekend, and they're like, well, we don't have maintenance here, but I'll do the best that I can. My wife and I went out to dinner with some friends, and we came back, and this poor front desk person, rather than putting bricks or blocks underneath the wheels itself, she put blankets in between the mattresses that raised the mattress up, but not the bed. And that's where you learn that communication has to be specific. Yeah, and I try not to call out specific hotels, and this person was doing the best they could with the understanding that they had. My wife and I got a pretty good chuckle out of the amount of effort she must have put in to put like probably 10 blankets folded up under the mattress, but it did not make it more accessible for us. So yeah, it's, I know my friends like in manual wheelchairs would prefer to have a mirror that is pivotable so that they can see themselves. Yeah, it's yeah, the lodging piece seems to be probably the biggest moving target for at least the community that I work within. Yeah, just because everybody has a wide spectrum of needs. And I don't know if there is a great solution for that out there right now, but for that, I think I'll pass.
Yeah, this is Dorian. I think that um, there is such a wide a variety of needs, and communicating the challenges what uh, of what I need when lodging can be difficult, because I think that um, there is a misunderstanding of uh, what accessibility looks like in lodging, because it is so drastically different from person to person, and what kinds of transfers a person feels comfortable with can vary. I know for myself, um, one of the communication snafus that I had recently was I was in a hotel in Canada, and we booked this room that was ADA accessible, or not, or, Canada's law accessible. Um, and we asked for a shower bench, and when we got there, there was no shower bench. And and it was a very expensive hotel that we were just staying for one night because we were going up somewhere else. And they never got us the shower bench. And at one point, the manager tried to say that the um, the uh, the uh, the room wasn't advertised as having a shower bench, but the room was advertised as having a roll-in shower. So I had to kind of be assertive and be like, well, it's advertised as having a roll-in shower, and if you can't stand up to shower, then how are you supposed to access bathing? And so yeah, so that, I basically had to sink wash that entire trip in a fancy hotel. So just really having to be clear on what accessibility looks like. I also stayed at a hotel recently in Seattle that is advertised as accessible, but they really just turned these old stairways into ramps, and the ramps were so steep that I had to like pull myself up the hand railing to get to. So somebody might be able to make that work, but I was like barely functioning, but I had no choice but to stay there. So it is really just being really communicative about what that particular place that you're staying in means by accessible, can because you can be in some really challenging situations otherwise.
Biggest accessibility challenges that I've encountered outside of transportation, so many, so many. This is Laura from Hopelink speaking. Um, I I can get really overwhelmed when I stay somewhere that has a lot of different rules or unique designs, and Airbnbs can be extremely exhausting for me. In terms of feeling like maybe I missed something and reading the binder like 10 or 20 times, and like spending so much time like even if I'm just staying one night at Airbnb, feeling like I have to like pass a test or that I'm gonna throw out the trash in the wrong place, or it just adds to my already very strong anxiety that I have. I do end up staying in Airbnbs even despite that, but I've learned that, it helps if I'm just staying one night somewhere, I stay at a hotel. If I'm staying multiple nights, then maybe I can manage the Airbnb because I have time to handle all of the extra, very quirky asks that some of these have. Um, I've also started looking for Airbnbs that say upfront, we're not going to ask you to do anything. Like just leave it to us at the end so that I can not have to like study for a test. Um, I also really like hotel chains that are like the same, like it's very predictable. It's very like comforting to me to walk in and know where the bathroom's going to be to the right and the light switch is going to look like this. And it's the same, the same is really comforting to me and fits with some of my different challenges that I face navigating when things are different all the time. So yeah, I guess predictability, again, familiarity, predictability as much as possible. And the lack of it is a big challenge.
Sarah speaking. Thank you all for sharing. I find it really interesting that the individualized needs comes up so frequently. And I think it's interesting when you look at applying that to travel frameworks, wherein you have these chains, these businesses, and sometimes they're small and sometimes they're branded and they're across the country, but all of these kind of vary in degrees to how well they can support the needs of an individual. There's something interesting to look at, I think specifically with hotels and that, where you're looking at the people who are staying there and wanting them to have a good experience and not always being able to provide that. So for our next question, I'd like to ask, what would an ideal, fully accessible travel experience look like to you?
This is Kenny again. An ideal, fully accessible travel experience. You know, barrier free. It's hard to conceptualize it, considering how behind some of the systems are. I speak specifically when it comes to air travel. The airplanes were left off of the ADA because of a lack of understanding, because the Air Carrier Accessibility Act of 1986 predated it, but it actually didn't really open up true accessibility when it comes to air travel. So I could think of that one specifically of me rolling onto a plane somewhere and locking my chair in place and never having to get out of it because I've got a long history of pressure issues from being in improper seating and positioning, and so to be in my well-crafted seat that protects my skin would be wonderful. But yeah, just stress-free, barrier-free, as seamless as most other people can experience the travel that they go through on a day-to-day, year-to-year basis would be yeah, showing up just as I am, where I am, and having the needs anticipated. I don't know what that looks like in action. It's great in theory, but yeah, there are pockets of accessibility which we'll probably touch on with some of the other questions that I saw. But yeah, for now, it would be not having to constantly fight, beg, and plead for that semblance of normalcy that most able-bodied people take for granted. So, yeah.
Yeah, this is Dorian. You know, I'm thinking about this question, and it really just got me thinking about how much I missed spontaneity in travel. Because, something that Kenny said about, being able to experience traveling and just going from one place to the next, the same as everybody else. Is that my ability to just be spontaneous um, has been taken away largely because of the inaccessibility of travel, and that could be just going to a new restaurant, for example. Uh, I don't live somewhere where public transportation is accessible, but sometimes it's like, okay, well, am I going to have to take a park and ride in? Is the hills going to be accessible for me to access with my manual chair if I were to go that route? Am I going to have to drive in because of the inaccessibility of the geography? What's parking going to be like? Is parking going to have enough accessible parking for me to access the space? And so really just having seamlessness makes a fully accessible travel experience for me. I've had very close experiences that satisfy that itch for me. But yeah, it requires removal of a lot of barriers and the ability to just access things without a lot of effort.
I'm going to use this question to advocate for something that our mobility team sees and hears about on a daily basis. Um, Same day transportation options, an abundance of same day transportation options for people that need a fully accessible travel experience that are denied that right now for all sorts of reasons, and we just don't have that for people. A lot of times you do have to plan in advance. You do have to ask a lot of extra questions. You do have to double check. We hear over and over again where people are like, oh yeah, like we're fully wheelchair accessible. And then someone who has a power wheelchair over a certain weight, they're waiting for their ride. The person shows up and they're like, oh, we actually can't take you. um, just having all of that go away where people aren't being set up to be stranded or at the last minute. um, yeah, so putting the work back on the organizations that are providing the travel experience and not continue to keep the burden of navigating all this on the people that are just trying to have fun and spend money and do all the things that everyone else does when they're traveling. um, yeah, so abundant same day transportation options for people that need accessible transportation.
This is Sarah. Thank you all for sharing. I think one thing that kind of fascinates me about all of the ideals for what a fully accessible travel experience looks like is what form the solution comes in. Because when I find myself thinking about how these barriers can be eliminated, I think a lot of it comes down to where governments and agencies are willing to spend money. Because I think in a lot of instances, those barriers can take the form of financial strain. Like relating to Laura's example of people getting stranded, I think the next step for people is like, okay, well, if I'm stranded and these public transportation options aren't available, I go to private, or thinking about having to pay more for accessibility. Uh, which when you think about it, doesn't really make things very accessible. And so moving on to our next question, I have to apologize. I got the slide decks a little out of order. So our next question isn't on the PowerPoint, but I will say it now, and it is in our Zoom chat for reference. And so the next question is, what changes within the travel industry or within policy frameworks would create more equitable and accessible travel for people with disabilities? And I'll just go ahead and paste that in the chat as well for reference.
Yeah, this is Kenny speaking again. I alluded to the Air Carrier Access Act of 1986 that we've been advocating for accessible air travel for the better part of 4 decades now. I think that's a key piece of the puzzle right now. I sit on the advisory board for Alaska Airlines, that I know Laura's a big fan of, as she mentioned earlier, and I'm very loyal to them as well, just because when they have accidental damages that have happened in my chair, they respond in far better and more human ways than the rest of air carriers that I've worked with. But yeah, the ability to get a wheelchair onto an airplane would be, the biggest one for me. But yeah, but then I think of all the great programs that like Hopelink and the work that Laura and Dorian does as well, just as a coordinator. I get to meet a lot of people that just out in the Washington area, the greater community, that don't have the same kind of access that I do, just because I've got my own wheelchair van. And so recognizing the massive need for even local travel is much probably I don't know which project would be easier to tackle, to be honest, because I get to see a lot of people that are in adult family homes, skilled nursing facilities, and stuff, and I've joked for a long time that at the Here and Now project I throw parties with wheelchair users, but I really throw parties with privileged wheelchair users who have access to the transportation and means of travel that they can get to our stuff. And so the more we can remove even those local barriers, you can't travel across the country if you can't get out of your home. So I'll pass from there.
Yeah, this is Dorian. So I'm going to answer this question from both hats. Uh, as someone who work in public transportation, and I think that having the privilege to access travel is very huge. Working in public transportation and wanting to connect people to a life, one of the barriers and obstacles that I encounter is that there's so much influence on connecting disabled people to jobs and doctor's appointments. And yes, that's important, but there's also this like forgotten aspect of connecting us to joy and connecting us to our friends and our community and just the things that we want to do for fun. And there's a lot of emphasis placed in appointments when it comes to the policies around accessibility and travel. And unfortunately, I think that is because of how disability is placed in the hierarchy of policy and civil rights. One of the things that you mentioned that was mentioned earlier was the cost. And while cost is a financial barrier, it can be a burden. I often find working in policy that cost is an excuse, people use accessibility, say the fact that accessibility is going to cost too much before actually finding out how much it would cost. Whereas there is so much willingness to throw money at other things. There's not the same willingness to throw money at accessibility, and the burden is placing the burden again on us for access rather than the agencies that actually do have the financial means to do this.
This is Laura Lowe from Hopelink speaking, and a policy framework or a policy that I'd like kind of a spotlight on around equitable and accessible travel with people with disabilities is integrating sidewalk data into all of transit trip planners so that there are toggles for people to say, you know, I don't want a hill that's steeper than this, or I don't want a ramp that's steeper than this, or I need curb cuts, or all of this work that is happening at the Tasker Center for Accessible Technology, the Access Map project, the work that those folks are doing. Our long-term goal would be to integrate that into the trip planner that we do at Hopelink. Um, it's you know, it is expensive, but we are getting they are getting federal funding to do that work. And you know, thinking about who else will benefit from that information. Maybe robots that deliver things and people pushing strollers and you know, getting back to that idea of universal human-centered design and how something that could benefit a kind of a small group of people, which is why sometimes the money it doesn't get allocated, you know, really making those broad cases for why we need complete sidewalks to joyful things, not just our hospitals, not just our schools. You know, there's policy for safe routes to schools, but what about safe routes to playgrounds, right? In general, or safe routes to going to your spa, like, or whatever, you know, like there should just be safe routes, period, not just like a niche activity. Um, yeah. So I just want to highlight, and I couldn't do an emoji react, but a verbal emoji react to joyful travel as a policy priority.
Thank you all so much for those thoughtful reflections. At this point, we're going to shift into our Q&A portion. So we invite our audience members to submit any questions they may have using the Zoom Q&A feature. And for those who might be unfamiliar with this, you can find the QA tab by clicking the More button, which is at the bottom of your screen and labeled with 3 dots, where you can then select Q&A and type your question and press send. And the questions will be visible to everyone on the webinar. I will read the questions that come in through that aloud to our panelists, and all our panelists are welcome to respond to any question and do not need to answer in the same order as earlier. Feel free to jump in whenever you'd like. We'll take as many questions as time allows. And so while people might be brainstorming some questions, I have a question I'll just address to you all first, which is, what guidance would you offer to travelers with disabilities who may feel uncertain about navigating new places or advocating for their needs?
Hey guys, it's Kenny. I would say lean into your subject matter expertise. You know, the first time I flew, you know, I talked to a lot of other wheelchair users in the community, and I got a lot of the tips and tricks. You know, granted that didn't eliminate some of the nightmares I experienced, but you know, I think about when I show up at the airport with a bag full of tools and saran wrap and foam that I wrap my chair in. My bag is too big for carry-ons, and but I lean into, the fact that I'm the expert at my system, and it's more of an ask forgiveness rather than an ask permission kind of thing. That because I know exactly what my system needs, what my chair needs, I kind of dictate the process in reverse. You'll get a little bit of pushback, especially in air travel, but the more you push for your rights, and your needs, then people tend to get yeah, to help you out a lot more. So.
Mm. I uh will have to. I think it's important to be assertive about your needs, but I think that um, also be mindful that not everyone gets treated the same by TSA when they push back against things. So be mindful of what you can and how safe it is for you to assert your needs when you're and I'd say that because I do get a lot of negative pushback as a Black person from TSA when asserting my needs. So it can be mindful that not everybody can access their needs in the same level of safety.
This is Laura Lowe speaking, and as somebody that has born in Colombia on my passport, whenever I travel internationally, it's not the funnest thing. The types of questions I'm asked and the additional kind of anxiety leading up to those conversations, and kind of the way I feel afterwards, maybe having to stand in a line much longer. Sometimes I just end up sitting on the ground and things like that. So definitely want to echo what was just said about, different folks can feel safer or not in different environments, unfortunately. And there's the intersectionality of this all. What I was going to say about traveling with disabilities, I went through a phase where I had limited mobility. I couldn't take public transit. I couldn't get around. And I really relied on this Facebook group of people that were going through the same thing that I was. It was leading up to getting a hysterectomy, and there was like 65,000 people in this Facebook group, and I just loved being able to ask that group anything at any time, wherever I was. It was kind of a 4-year process for me. Um, and, it was a lot of like, this is a new thing I'm dealing with. How do you all deal with this? And just like crowdsourcing. So finding like that Reddit group or the Facebook group, or, if you're lucky, an in-person group of people that are struggling. And sometimes it could be international, like the place you're going to, finding that group that's there that, I've met up with people in other states that I've, formed connections with online. And then they're like, oh, I'll be at this coffee shop at this day and time if you want to stop by and say hi. And like, you can end up making friends in other places through that. I don't know if other people have had that experience here where you're just asking for advice and now you're like buddies. So that's kind of cool. So yeah, take advantage of peer navigators formally and informally, wherever you are going. And that can be joyful, even stressful and joyful at the same time.
Okay, it looks like our next question is going to be from Carla, who said, this may have been addressed already, but when a wheelchair is damaged, what are the next steps? Filing a claim in parentheses or in quotations with the airline, of course, but any steps beyond that? Thanks.
Um, this is Dorian. I'm sure Kenny and I both have a lot to say about this. The first step is to definitely report it. It, it, what I've had three chairs damaged by three different airlines, and the level of damage was different from every chair. And as I mentioned before, I didn't always notice the damage right away. And then some of then other times, my chair was just not usable. So I think really just uh, making sure that you have a record of what your chair looked like and what condition your chair was in prior to the flight, and is really helpful. And I yeah, I recommend also just finding out what people's experiences are with the airlines that you've chosen for your flight, because not unfortunately, because of the Air Carrier Act, not all airlines are made equal when it comes to protecting chairs. And I will have to say I've had one negative experience with one airline that's now an airline I would fly all the time, because of just how their processes have improved, and making sure that they label your chair like as well. Like they always put a tag on it, but how important is that tag to the airline? Because that is kind of a clue on how safe that they'll keep your chair.
Yeah, hey guys, it's Kenny. Thanks, Dorian, for that. One thing that I've found useful, or I can't echo Laura's comment about having a community of support, but from one of the community resources that I've leaned into all over the country with some of my friends is when before you travel, try to find at least one durable medical equipment provider that may be in the vicinity in the off chance that something does happen, so that you have that backup call. I think of when I landed in Newark in 2016 and my chair was destroyed. Yeah, they just had some mom and pop shop show up and take my wheelchair, and I got a hand controlled chair for the next 5 days when I was in Manhattan, and it was a pretty harrowing experience. But yeah, the unfortunate reality is because of the ACAA's, kind of falling underneath the jurisdiction of the Department of Transportation instead of the Department of Justice. Yeah, the only recourse you have is making that report. Since about 2019, airlines have been mandated to report the damages themselves, but still they don't quite get held accountable as they should. Yeah, so depending on the amount of damage, and Dorian nailed it with the fact that you may not notice the damage until you're off site. And so to be really extra thorough, because something as similar or as simple as a quick release lever on one side of your chair being broken can be pretty disastrous when that's the only side you might transfer in and out of. So yeah, I wish I had a clearer answer, but that's what I got.
This is Sarah. Thank you both for your responses. I am going to move on to the next question, which is from Alyssa, who is an occupational therapy student in Ohio, who is doing a capstone project on accessible travel. And she asked, as someone without a disability, is there any advice you can give me for advocating and actually being helpful to the process and needs of traveling with a disability?
Hi, this is Laura speaking. Outside of my role at work, I do a lot of advocacy with different organizations um, that are connected to policy leaders. And again, going back to that community, finding people in the community that are already doing the policy work and taking action together and bringing snacks, because for some reason there's never snacks at these big meetings in Olympia or at your local municipality or wherever your state capital is. So I know that right now in Washington State, there's a bunch of organizations that are hosting lobby days, and then so finding who that is at Hopelink, that's not the role that we fulfill. We're an education organization, but there's lots of great groups in our state that kind of take on and educate people about how to tell their stories. There's been story mapping projects that have led to white papers that have led to allocation of resources to these things. So I would say, the Non-Drivers Alliance is a new one. Nationally, there's America Walks. There's, I'm sure King County Disability Consortium, I'm sure could provide a list of things in your community to get. But yeah, learning how to tell your story efficiently, concisely, and powerfully. It's a skill, and it's very scary. And so you want to do it with people that you trust, and make sure that you're not that you trust the people that you're telling your story to as well. Yeah, Kimberly posted in the chat, when in the moment, people with disabilities, their own best experts in their needs, don't usurp their knowledge and expertise. Be an advocate, don't take their voice. So, if you are giving up your voice and you are giving your story to something, make sure that other people that have done that are vouching for them, saying, this is a place where you do want to give your story to them, or seeing if you can be like in that room and not have people just reading your story in the room.
Yeah, this is Kenny. That's where I'd say try to elevate people's stories. Yeah.
This is Sarah. Dorian just said Non-Drivers Alliance is great. So that might be a good resource. And so we'll move on to our next question, which is from Colin, who says, the immigration process can be an inconvenience for many people with disabilities, especially when it takes so long that you miss a connecting flight. This is exactly what happened to my trip to Norway in 2025 when my family connected in Frankfurt, so we were stuck in Germany for 6 hours. Do any of you have a story about immigration being a big roadblock on your trips?
This is Kenny. I have not traveled internationally, so I will pass on to people who have.
I went to Colombia on a reconnection trip in 2024. I was adopted there, but I hadn't gone back. And I decided to go through a travel agency, and I literally had to go around and around and around with the travel agent to get her to understand why I needed to have like a 2-step day ahead of time and then a 2-step day afterwards, to make sure to account for what if I was detained, what if I did, have to endure that at both sides of my trip. And so she just didn't understand. She's like, you're wasting 2 days of your trip. Why would you do that? You're going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. So yeah, again, just going back to like, won't be using that travel agent again. Definitely needed to find somebody that was informed about what risks I was undergoing doing that trip. And for me, it was breaking up the journey into 2 days, and so that I would be like really rested and ready for whatever happened. not knowing what was going to happen. So yeah, definitely just another thing where more time, more money was spent um, than for maybe somebody traveling without those additional concerns.
Yeah, this is Dorian. I haven't experienced any significant delays, but there's preparation for it. I know um, I connecting flights is a big one, so I make sure that there's a big enough gap so that I will be waiting somewhere for a long time. If, as mentioned before, if there's any sort of um, uh, issues with my passport coming in, or anything like that, I just gotta prepare for those things. But my biggest thing I have to prepare for is transfers. They generally are very they're not very mindful of any connecting flights when they let me off the plane. So just make sure that there's a long enough delay in case there are any sort of snafus at the airport, or messed up situations at the airport.
If anyone else has any questions, feel free to ask. In the meantime, I have a question I'd love to address to you all. So I think something that Kenny mentioned earlier about having human interactions really piqued my interest. And so I wanted to ask a little bit more about how interactions with staff affect your travel experience. Because I think there's something really interesting in like being able to connect with someone who cares and is willing to put in time and effort to address your accessibility needs.
Yeah, this is Kenny. This is where I always give a big shout out to Alaska Airlines, specifically their transfer teams. When anybody that's experienced what I call the clipboard on wheels, that is the aisle chair experience when traveling on an airplane, that can be a nightmare in and of itself and rather dangerous just because it's not very um, comfortable or accommodating. But the Alaska Airlines transfer team actually carved out a position for themselves. They found that when they were lifting people, that they, recognized the need for extra safety, extra training. And so I think they are one of the first standalone teams that actually, had the forethought and an idea to really specialize things when it comes to some of their training. And, specifically, I can think of, gosh, I think it was the last time that I flew. My wife and I flew with our, 3-year-old daughter and my mother-in-law down to Arizona in 2023 or 24 now. And it's a really stressful experience because my wife is trying to break my wheelchair down, kind of at the gate, taking off all the breakable parts, and you've got a very quick turnaround when you're trying to load, and especially when you're going to be the first person on the plane, and then you're the last person off. My wife was really struggling to get my wheelchair put back together when we got back from our trip, and one of the transfer team people just kind of said, slowed the whole machine down. Everybody else was in a hurry. She's like, no, I want this to stop where it's at. And she was really patient with my wife and helped my wife get things squared away. And so it's in recognizing, when staff recognizes the need for that accessibility and pushes for it themselves, it makes a world of difference.
Yeah, I echo. I think going above and beyond, and I've definitely had some experiences that were. Oh, this is Dorian, by the way, that were um, memorable from going above and beyond. But similarly, I think um, that attention to detail, I think, as far as on the plane, could be handled if you have to be transferred onto the plane to so on the plane I have to use an aisle chair to get to the bathroom. And um, I have discovered the flight attendants often are not trained on how to use the aisle chair, with the exception of when they first were onboarded it. So sometimes I have to teach them how to use it. And I've had experiences where they were really kind about it. But I had this one experience where this person just was very loud about me having to use this aisle chair and kept talking about how they'd never experienced it before, and kept talking about it like I couldn't hear them talking about their frustrations with the aisle chair the entire like 5 hour flight, rest of the flight, I think it was, or something like that. And it made me feel very uncomfortable, and like almost highlighted that I was on the plane, right? More than having to get an aisle chair already does. So
I recently had an interaction at an Airbnb where the person at the Airbnb offered to drive me to the coffee shop that I was going to because it was much further than I had expected. You could argue that I'm taking a risk in that. I trust strangers quite a bit, maybe compared to other people, but I thought it was a lovely gesture. It was in a small community, and it really made my day and made my trip that they could recognize that I was staying further away from the main downtown area than I had realized I was. So, you know, again, you're trusting in that situation that you're not getting taken advantage of, or that something bad's going to happen. But knock on wood, most of my life when I've trusted strangers, it's gone pretty well for me. But there's you know, you never know.
Lovely. This is Sarah. Unless anyone has any more questions, I think we might wrap up a little bit early. So I would like to thank our panelists so much for sharing their time, their experiences, and their insights. And thank you to everyone as well who joined us for this Understanding Ableism webinar. Before we wrap up, we would really appreciate your feedback. Your input helps us measure and improve future webinars. And um, any feedback you can give us is always appreciated. So if you have time, please complete this short post webinar survey using either the QR code on the screen or the link in the chat, which I put right now. Oh, that didn't start, did it? Oops. Give me just a second. I'll do that.
Well, I let Sarah get that link for you. Um, I will just help wrap up and say a quick reminder that today's session was recorded and it will be uploaded to Disability Empowerment Center's YouTube channel. So if you'd like to revisit the conversation or share it with others, you'll be able to access it there, and we'll post the link to that in chat as well. I hope you'll join us next month for our Understanding Ableism webinar. It will be on February 17th, where we will be discussing the intersection between art and disability. Experiences with disability have long shown up in the work of artists. And this panel will explore how audiences engage with disabled art and how the art sector can create a space not only for inclusion, but for leadership, authorship, and authentic storytelling. Thanks again for being part of our conversation, and have a wonderful rest of your day.